The summer my brother came home, the air felt heavier than usual, thick with memories, laughter, and something unnamed that waited in the quiet corners of the house. I had been alone there for months, taking care of our late parents' lake property while finishing a freelance project that was supposed to get me back on my feet. I didn't know then that by the end of that summer, it wouldn't be the project I'd be thinking about. It would be Ryan Hale, my brother's best friend, and a secret I never meant to keep. Liam arrived first, loud as ever, sunlight bouncing off his truck as he stepped out like the world owed him applause. He was everything I wasn't: confident, outgoing, careless in the way people who are loved too easily tend to be. His wife, Ava, followed him, graceful as always, her smile a fragile balance between joy and fatigue. They'd been married 2 years, and though she tried to hide it, something about her eyes looked dimmer than I remembered. Then Ryan came. That I'd heard his name for years, Liam's college roommate, the one who got him out of trouble, who once saved his life in a snowstorm. But no story prepared me for seeing him in person. He was taller than I expected, his presence calm but quietly commanding. When he smiled, it wasn't wide or eager, it was soft, deliberate, as though he smiled only when it mattered. "Ethan," he said, shaking my hand. "Finally meeting the mysterious little brother." I tried to laugh, but the sound came out awkward. I think I lost the little part somewhere after 26. Liam clapped me on the back. "Don't let him fool you, Ryan. He's still the same quiet kid who used to hide in his room." I smiled, pretending it didn't sting. That was Liam's way, affection wrapped in mockery. Ryan, though, didn't laugh. He just looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze before he let go of my hand. The first evening passed in comfortable noise. Ava made dinner, Liam poured drinks, Ryan and I exchanged the small, polite words strangers share when trying not to seem curious. Later, as the night thinned into quiet, I found Ryan alone on the porch, watching the lake's reflection break beneath the moonlight. "Can't sleep?" I asked it. He shook his head. "Too quiet. I grew up in the city. Silence makes me feel like I'm being watched." "By who?" He smiled faintly. "My thoughts, maybe." It was an odd thing to admit to someone you just met, but there was honesty in it, unforced, raw. For reasons I didn't yet understand, I wanted to stay there, listening. That we talked until the crickets softened their rhythm and the lake began to pale with dawn. He told me about his work as a photographer, the way he saw beauty in imperfection. I told him about my failed attempts at writing, how words came easily but meaning didn't. It felt easy, effortless, like remembering someone rather than meeting them. The next few days blurred into warmth and laughter. Liam insisted on boating trips and backyard barbecues, Ava painted by the water, and Ryan, he floated between us all, somehow fitting everywhere and belonging nowhere. He helped Ava with her canvases, teased Liam about his terrible grilling, and yet, when he looked at me, it was different, quiet, observant, as if he was waiting for something I hadn't said. One afternoon, I found him sitting by the dock, camera in hand. "You don't take many photos of people," I said, noticing the empty frame counter. "They move too much," he replied. "I like stillness. It tells the truth." "What truth?" "That nothing really stays." He looked at me then, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. That I didn't know what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. But something in that look lingered, unspoken, cautious, and yet pulling me in like the slow drag of a tide. That evening, Liam and Ava went into town, leaving Ryan and me alone. The house felt larger without their voices, filled with the hum of ceiling fans and the sound of distant thunder. We watched the storm roll in from the porch, the lake turning restless beneath flashes of light. That he spoke first. "You and Liam, you're close." "Were," I admitted. "We used to be. Things got complicated after Dad died. He left, and I stayed. I guess we grew apart." Ryan nodded, his eyes on the storm. "He told me once you were the one who kept him grounded. Funny how people say things they don't live by." I looked at him. "He talks about me?" "More than you think." He turned toward me, his expression softer now. "He says you see people clearly. That you notice things others don't." Something inside me stirred, an ache, or maybe gratitude. "I don't know about that." "I do," he said, quietly. "You've been noticing me since the day I arrived." The words hung in the air, neither accusation nor invitation. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but I couldn't. Because it was true. Before I could respond, thunder broke overhead, and the power flickered out. The house went dark except for the pale light of lightning spilling through the windows. For a heartbeat, we sat in silence, the world outside roaring. Then Ryan spoke again, his voice barely above the rain. "Ethan," he said, "there's something I've been meaning to tell your brother. Something I should have told him a long time ago." My pulse quickened. "About what?" He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the storm. "It's complicated." Before I could ask, the sound of a car engine broke the moment, Liam and Ava returning. Ryan stood quickly, his composure snapping back into place. "Later," he said, and walked inside. The rest of the night unfolded in fragments, laughter, small talk, the clinking of glasses. But my mind wasn't there. It was still on the porch, in the dark, with the sound of Ryan's voice caught between thunder and confession. When everyone finally went to bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the room. I told myself it didn't matter. He was my brother's friend, nothing more. But beneath that logic, something was shifting, something I couldn't name. As the wind rattled the windows and the house sighed in its sleep, I realized what unsettled me wasn't what Ryan might be hiding. It was what I already knew about myself, and somewhere down the hall, I could hear his footsteps, slow, measured, and impossibly near. Malik began visiting more often after that afternoon, each time under the faint excuse of waiting for Caleb. Sometimes he'd bring takeout, sometimes a basketball he never used. It became a quiet routine, one that neither of us questioned aloud. I told myself it was harmless, that I was only keeping him company until my brother came home. But part of me knew that wasn't the truth. He'd sit on the couch, relaxed and confident, while I pretended to focus on my sketchbook. Our conversations wandered, never about anything significant, yet somehow always circling the same invisible point. He'd ask about my art, my music, the things I never talked about with Caleb. There was a gentleness in the way he listened, as though every word mattered. One evening, the power flickered out mid-conversation. The hum of the refrigerator died, and darkness filled the room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Malik's low laugh broke the silence. "Guess it's just us and the dark." I lit a candle, its flame softening the edges of the room. He leaned forward, his face half-lit, eyes reflecting the light like polished glass. "You ever notice how quiet everything gets when the power's out?" he said. That I nodded. "It's like the world stops pretending." He smiled at that. "You think too much, Ethan." "Maybe," I said. "But it's safer than saying too much." His gaze lingered. "I get that." The air between us thickened, heavy with unspoken thoughts. I didn't move. Neither did he. We stayed in that strange stillness, the kind that blurs the line between comfort and danger. When the power returned, it startled us both. He exhaled, almost as if he'd been holding his breath. "I should probably head out," he said, standing too quickly. I didn't stop him. But after he left, the room felt emptier than before. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that what I'd felt wasn't real. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe curiosity. Still, when his name appeared on my phone again, my pulse reacted before my mind did. He came by the following weekend, and Caleb was working late again. Malik stayed longer than usual, helping me move some boxes from the garage. At one point, he found an old photo of Caleb and me from childhood. "You look different here," he said, studying it. "I was lighter then," I replied without thinking. That he tilted his head. "You still are, just quieter about it." It was such a simple thing to say, but it landed like a truth I hadn't realized I'd been hiding from. As the evening stretched, Malik opened up in ways he never had before. He spoke about his father, how hard it was growing up with someone who demanded strength but never showed affection. He told me about leaving Detroit, about trying to rebuild his life somewhere he could breathe. His honesty disarmed me. "I don't talk like this with anyone," he admitted. "Why me?" I asked that. He looked at me for a long time before answering. "Because you listen without judging." I wanted to tell him that it wasn't just listening, that I felt connected to him in a way I couldn't explain, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded, pretending my silence was understanding, not fear. Later that night, we sat on the back porch. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain. He leaned back, looking at the sky. "You ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something, but you don't know if it's worth the fall?" I hesitated. "All the time." He turned to me, and for a heartbeat, our eyes locked. There was no mistaking it anymore, the pull, the quiet question neither of us dared to answer. Before either of us could speak, a car passed by, breaking the moment. Malik stood abruptly. "I should go," he said, voice low. That I wanted to ask him to stay, but the words stuck in my throat. That night, sleep refused to come. I kept seeing his face, hearing his voice, feeling the echo of something unfinished. It wasn't about desire, not exactly. It was about recognition, as though he'd seen a part of me I'd kept hidden from everyone, even myself. Days passed with no word from him. Caleb didn't mention him either. The silence stretched until I began to believe it had ended before it began. Then one evening, I came home to find Malik sitting on the porch steps, waiting. "Caleb's not home," I said. "I know," he replied. "I came to see you." He said it simply, without hesitation. My heart stuttered that we went inside. The house felt unnaturally still, every sound amplified, the closing door, the soft creak of the floorboards. Malik looked around as if seeing the place differently. "You ever notice how quiet it gets here?" he said again, echoing that night of the blackout. "I like the quiet," I said. "I used to," he murmured, stepping closer. The tension was unbearable, not because of what was happening, but because of what wasn't. He looked at me, really looked, and I felt something in the room shift. There was no movement, no touch, just an unspoken crossing of distance. "Ethan," he said quietly, "I don't know what this is." "Neither do I." He exhaled, a sound somewhere between a sigh and surrender. "But it feels real." I wanted to answer, but my voice failed me. The moment hung in the air, fragile, dangerous, irreversible. Then, as if realizing what he'd said, he stepped back. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Then why are you?" He hesitated, then smiled sadly. "Because I wanted to be." The words hit harder than they should have. He left a few minutes later, the door closing behind him with a finality that felt like an ending, but as I stood there, staring at the space he'd just occupied, I knew it wasn't over. Something had been set in motion, something neither of us could easily undo. That night, the rain returned, tapping softly against the windows. I sat in the dark, remembering the candlelight, the sound of his voice, the way his presence filled the room. That I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew that a line had been drawn, and somewhere between silence and confession, we had already stepped across it, and though no one else would have noticed, the world around me suddenly felt different, like the calm before a storm I could no longer pretend wasn't coming. Caleb noticed before I ever said a word. It started with the smallest things, how I avoided Malik's name in conversation, how my laughter disappeared whenever he mentioned him. My brother had an instinct for tension, especially when it came from people he trusted. "Everything good between you and Malik?" he asked one morning, pouring coffee like it was a casual question. "Yeah," I said too quickly. That he studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "He's been quiet lately." Thought maybe something happened. Something had happened, but it wasn't something I could explain, not to him, not to anyone. Malik hadn't come around in nearly 2 weeks. No calls, no texts. The silence was its own kind of confession that I tried to move on. I buried myself in sketches, in work, in the dull rhythm of daily life. But every night, I found myself staring at my phone, half hoping it would light up with his name. It never did. Then one evening, I came home to find Caleb sitting in the living room, Malik beside him. The sight hit me like a physical shock. They were laughing, loudly, easily, like nothing had ever shifted between them. Malik looked up as I entered, and for a split second, the laughter drained from his face. "Hey, Ethan," he said, voice careful. "Hey," I replied, trying to sound normal. The rest of the evening was torture. Every gesture, every glance felt deliberate, rehearsed. Malik wouldn't meet my eyes, and Caleb didn't notice the space between us. The silence stretched thin with everything unspoken. When they left for the gym later that night, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the faint reflection in the window. I didn't recognize the person looking back. Over the next few weeks, Malik's visits returned to their usual rhythm, but the rhythm had changed. He came when Caleb was home, laughed when expected, left before anything could linger. It was like we had silently agreed to erase the past, though neither of us knew how, but the harder we tried to ignore it, the more the memory lingered. Sometimes he'd glance my way mid-conversation, and the weight of that look would drag me back to that night, to that moment when silence had meant everything. Then came the day Caleb left for a 3-day business trip. I thought Malik wouldn't show up. I was wrong that he knocked late in the evening, the sky outside bruised with clouds. I hesitated before opening the door. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly. "I know," he answered. But I couldn't stay away anymore. There was no pretense this time. No small talk, no excuses. We stood facing each other, both aware of how dangerous it felt just to share the same air. "I've been trying to forget," he said. "But I can't." "Not you." I didn't reply. Words would have broken whatever fragile truth existed in that silence. That he stepped closer, and I felt the air shift. But before anything could happen, I moved back. "Malik, don't." He stopped, eyes searching mine. "You think I want this? You think I don't know what it would destroy?" I swallowed hard. "Then why are you here?" "Because I made a promise to myself to stop running from what's real," he said, his voice low, trembling at the edges. The room seemed to hold its breath. I could feel the storm building outside, wind pressing against the windows, matching the pulse in my chest. Then, as if sensing the danger in what he'd just confessed, Malik exhaled and stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said. "You don't deserve this." He turned to leave, but I reached out without thinking. My hand brushed his sleeve, just a touch, nothing more, and yet it felt like every emotion I'd tried to bury surfaced in that moment. "Don't disappear again," I said softly. That he looked at me, eyes dark, unreadable. "If I stay, I'll ruin everything." He left before I could respond, the door closing like the final note of a song that ended too soon. That night, thunder rolled in, shaking the house. I sat awake until morning, wondering how something that had barely begun could already feel like a loss. The next few days were quiet. Caleb returned, full of stories and energy, completely unaware of the storm that had passed through his home. Malik didn't come by again. He didn't text, didn't call. His silence this time felt deliberate, an ending, not a pause. Weeks turned into months. Life resumed its pattern, dull and predictable. But every so often, I'd catch myself glancing at the front door, expecting him to appear. He never did. Then one afternoon, as I was cleaning the kitchen, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Some lines change everything. No name, no context. But I didn't need either. I knew that I stared at the message until the words blurred. My chest felt heavy, not with regret, but with something more complicated, acceptance. Maybe Malik was gone, but his absence lingered like a shadow that never quite faded. I didn't tell Caleb about the message. Some truths don't belong to anyone else. Time moved on, quietly and without apology. Yet sometimes, when I passed the porch at night, I'd imagine him sitting there again, silent, waiting, the air between us still charged with everything that had been left unsaid. That I realized then that what had happened wasn't just about desire or guilt. It was about understanding something I'd never faced, the part of myself that wanted to be seen, even when it meant breaking the illusion of who I was supposed to be. Malik hadn't destroyed me. He had revealed me, and though I'd never see him again, I carried his voice with me, the honesty, the conflict, the quiet courage it took to walk away. Some stories don't end with closure, they end with recognition. That I learned that night, that love doesn't always stay, it sometimes arrives only to show you what was missing before it leaves. As I turned off the lights and stood in the quiet of my empty home, I whispered into the stillness, not expecting an answer. "Some lines," I said softly, "aren't meant to be crossed, but they still change everything." The wind outside rose again, brushing against the windows like a fading memory. I closed my eyes and let it pass, knowing that the storm had long since ended, but its echo would never completely fade.